It was an attempted rape by somebody in Wenatchee. And when the police did not do anything about it, and when I had even done a rape kit and gone to the hospital and everything, when they refused to do anything is then suddenly when I was being assaulted with military technology, which sort of follows my being assaulted with military technology after I was being repeatedly raped by people connected to the federal government after being set up to be incapacitated. So, I'm repeatedly raped, set up in Oregon, and then I get assaulted with migraine after migraine. And then all of a sudden, I'm in Washington State, and I got some documentation of another incident, and the response was to assault me again. So, I had the car vandalisms, and then my son and I were both assaulted with military technology after I went to the Chelan Douglas police and tried to report this rape. And what happened is, we were living on Methow in this house, and it was 2 stories. So the lower story had one family. They were a Mexican family. And then upstairs there were 2 different rooms, or 2 different apartments. The upstairs was separated into 2 apartments. And some Hispanic guys were in one apartment, and then I was in the other with my son. And at some point they had a friend come over every now and then, or I think they moved out. And then there was another man who moved in, and he was from Cuba. And after he brought over some wine. It was red wine, because I didn't buy the wine. And my son was sleeping, and we'd talked at different times, and with the other Mexican guys, they used to cook for me and for my son, and they were very hospitable, very nice, and very interested in my son's well-being and everything. And I tried to do some small things too, but, just trying to be a good neighbor. But I wasn't, physically involved with anyone there. And, they made really good Mexican food, too. I mean, just really good, authentic Mexican food. And, that was while I was pregnant, and also after I was pregnant. So, they say that a kid's tastes are sometimes developed a little bit in the womb. He definitely had a good head start in having good taste, because he got a lot of good food. I made him very good organic Chinese food and other kinds of Mexican food that I tried to make. But he also had authentic Mexican food from people that were hospitable to me. Anyway, that's a little side tangent. But I wanted to say that because I was so tired sometimes. I was so exhausted, and I was so fat and everything. And for them to do that was a really nice thing to do when I was not feeling very good. And, especially towards the end of my pregnancy. So, this guy from Cuba moved into this apartment next to me, and he brought over a bottle of red wine one time, and I'd visited with him at different times. It wasn't attracted, there's nothing romantic between us. And after I'd had a couple glasses, I definitely had enough, and it was a rare occasion because I wasn't drinking. I believe that was when I had my son on a bottle temporarily, because he was a little bit older, and I was trying the formula with him for a short time, not as long as I left the formula that was sitting out there and ready for me to pick up, because there was all of this stuff, and I didn't want him to get my son to be on that instead of breast milk. But I did do the formula for a really short time, like a few days or so, before I realized that would be the result. And to give us a small break from the breastfeeding, because it was very painful when we had thrush. So, basically I then began to express my milk So it was painful for me all the time, but it wasn't for my son as much. I mean, I think he was still had systemic thrush, so it was probably still painful, but it wasn't as much of an effort for him to, you know. And anyway, he had some wine with him, and I had a couple glasses, and otherwise I never drank. So I hadn't had anything to drink because of my pregnancy. I never drank. I never had caffeine. I didn't have any coffee during my pregnancy. I didn't have tea. I had nothing with caffeine, and I had no alcohol, nothing. And after my son was born, because I was breastfeeding, I didn't have any kind of liquor or other substances, although later I think I had a little bit of tea here and there. And so I was definitely intoxicated, and he began to make advances and started to, and I pushed him off. I pushed him away. And he forced himself, he kept trying and forced himself, even though I was shouting no and pushing him off. And I mean, this was like, again. So I actually went to the hospital, and I knew that because of his attempt to force himself, I knew that there might be some documentation of that. So I went to the hospital. They did a rape kit, and they took photos of that area, and she said that it did look like there was evidence of something. And they did a DNA swab and everything, and to see if he'd actually made contact. And they had all of this evidence with them. So then they had to submit it to the police. And I told the police what happened. Well, the Chelan Douglas police were the same police that set me up to be raped by the Italian-American doctor. And they refused to take my report. They said, we're not doing anything about this. And then I checked to find out, because they're supposed to process rape kits, they didn't process it. They decided to hold on to it and do nothing. They're supposed to give it to the FBI, actually, and have the FBI process it, and the FBI didn't want to process it because they didn't want to document any kind of evidence of my ever having been assaulted by anybody, I guess. I guess they wanted to make me look like I was always talking about stuff and that I never had any evidence. So then I find out, I said, well, at some point when they kept refusing to do anything, I couldn't believe it, and I said, I'd like to have copies of the photos and some of this evidence. They told me that everything had disappeared. They didn't have it anymore. They didn't know where things were. So then I had this additional humiliation of not knowing where rape photos had gone of me. And, you know, having the idea that probably somebody was passing them around. And on a rape. It wasn't like I was out in public in a bikini or, you know, doing nude sunbathing somewhere or something like that. It was documentation of rape. And then they never had that rape kit processed. So I went to the Domestic Women's Advocacy Group again. And I said, I need to get a restraining order because he started harassing me. He began driving back and forth past my house and was visibly harassing me. And actually, I think I said that I maybe shouldn't be too hard on somebody who's from a different country. But when I think about how many times he harassed me and went out of his way to stalk me after what he'd done and after he got away with what he'd done, I think I have to take that back because he knew what he was doing and he was following the same pattern that other federal agents had followed. So he didn't have any excuse, even if he was from a different country and didn't totally know the laws. He was stalking me. He was it was very upsetting and caused a lot of anxiety. So he started driving past my house very slowly, and he would always mock me. Get this really sarcastic smirk on his face. Really just going out of his way to mock the fact that police were not going to do anything. And so I went to this domestic woman's place, and she said, you need to get a restraining... I told them what was happening, and she said, you need to get a restraining order. And because of all of the things that people were throwing at me from one angle to the next, I'd never been able to get a restraining order filed against the Abbey, but I at different times was trying to do that and trying to get that done because of what they'd done to my grandparents, my family. And I always wanted to contest what they had said about me too, and be able to show that I was medically unable to attend that hearing. So the women at this place said, this one woman said, well, I will go and help you file for this. Gave me forms and said, this is how you file for anti-harassment restraining order. The police, I asked the police to do that for me and they refused. So even when I told them I was then being stalked, they refused to even do a anti-harassment order. And I had a woman help me with that, and then took it to the court, and since she was kind of helping with advocacy for that, it did get filed. However, even after it was filed and I had that in my glove box, he still stalked and harassed me. I mean, I think I called maybe 1 or 2 times. I had to make a phone call about his showing up in an area where he knew I was going to be, and then approaching me or getting close when he knew that he didn't have to go out his way. Like, for example, one time, maybe I'll get into that later, but so basically I had a restraining order, but it wasn't because of police at all. The police were doing a lot of criminal things and covering up for criminal actions and setting things up against me. So after I reported what he had done is when my son and I were both assaulted. And I had a couple of phone calls from Krista Schneider about the same time, which were really suspicious. And right now I'm looking at my eyes and it looks like I have makeup on one eye and not the other eye. Since I've been talking so long, I need to take a quick break.